I have played Sorcerer since Season 0, with like 1,000 hours into the class now for my sins. And I have some thoughts. Hello, my fellow sorcerers! It is time to talk, well, all things Sorcerer. Not just specifically how we're doing in Season 6, though of course that is a big topic, but how the class itself is getting along. It has been a roller coaster ride playing it since the release of the game, actually since even before that, with many highs and many lows, and a lot of fundamentally kind of questionable broken design choices, admittedly addressed, but a few certainly remaining. Basically, I love this class, I love the fantasy of it, I like the skills, I like the playing of it, it's fun, it's fast, but there is definitely a lot of cracks that need filling in. So first and foremost, let's actually look at how we're doing in Season 6, the kind of power level we're working with. Of course, like every class, we can absolutely smash Torment for content, though I will say, if it wasn't for Fireball being bugged with the destructive node, even our best build after that would still be killing your Torment 4 bosses, lair bosses, solo a little bit too slow. And that's no surprise, because boss damage has now for the longest time been the big weakness of Sorcerer. Long gone are the days of a triple dipping aspect of control, staggering, as fun as that was. But that's something that will come up later. In any case, if we look at the pits then, well, we're gonna ignore Spiritborn, and I have to say this now, when I talk about Sorcerer and how it's doing, I will be doing it relative to the other relatively balanced classes, you know, your Necro, your Druid, your Rogue, and your Barbarian. Spiritborn is obviously a hilarious outlier. It has so much power, most of it shouldn't have, with a lot of bugged interactions, and undoubtedly it will be hit on the head pretty hard going into next season, and we should see some more equivalents. But the other 5 classes are all actually doing really well in relation to each other, and if Spiritborn wasn't a thing, we'd actually be saying that this is one of the most fairly balanced seasons ever, which, you know, is a good thing. So in terms of non-Spiritborn, and again, everything I talk about today will be in terms of non-Spiritborn, we have Necro in the lead at pit 114, then Barbarian at 112, though they are snapshotting Mighty Throw, and that's a whole other issue that if they couldn't do it would knock them down a lot. So realistically, Sorcerer should be second at pit 105, then Rogue at 103, and Druid at 102. Now, this is at the time of me recording this. It's not going to be going up for about a week since I say these words, so that might have changed, but it gives you a good general idea. So, yeah, our actual pit pushing and peak power isn't too outlandishly, well, outlandish compared to the other classes in either direction. We're kind of solidly in the middle, and I think that's honestly fine. That is a sort of healthy outlook. There's always got to be a best, there's always got to be a worst, you just don't want those to be too extreme in either direction, and they're not. That said, though, it ignores how Sorcerer is pushing to pit 105 and beyond, because it is shatterfishing, which is a very valid and cool thing to, you know, be able to do, but also, at least in my humble opinion, kind of lame and really unfun, and definitively it's just rubbish in every other content other than literally pushing the pit. If we had to look at our best build pit records that weren't doing shadowfishing, then we'd be around the 100 mark, which starts to look at the bottom of the barrel when it comes to classes, and there we have a kind of issue. So Sorcerer, I really think even our best builds need to be a little bit stronger to stay competitive going into Season 7. We are definitely feeling it, and a large part of that is your bosses. It's so funny to watch a high-end Sorcerer clear, tear through the mobs, and then sit there beating waiting on the boss for 10 minutes while you're trying your best to not fall asleep, and it really is a problem. Sorcerer has always been good at mass mobbing, at clearing rooms, and really it is the king of just speedily wiping hordes of enemies quickly, ignoring Spiritborn, who is, muscling in on that, but that is, that's a fine identity to have. But a lot of our damage also comes from CC, things like Control Glyph. That would be a huge increase, but of course against bosses, you only get like 3-4 staggers, and then you're sort of done, so that doesn't really help there. We are really good at killing things that are stunned, that are frozen, that are immobilized, but we just can't leverage that against bosses properly, so we hit a brick wall when we start to get healthy bosses put in our way. So we really need that addressed in a just across-the-board situation. So, ignoring fun factor, which I don't like to do, because ultimately this is a game we're playing for enjoyment, so I think fun is perhaps the most important factor in a realistic sense, how builds are to play and the classes to interact with, which I think in both cases is really good, which is why I refuse to change. But in terms of numerical power, compared to the non-Spiritborns, Sorcerer, you could argue, is bottom of the barrel, and even our best builds need a little bit, or actually a lot of bit of a bump to feel like they're going to stay competitive moving forward. And the largest component of that bump should be with dealing with single enemies with large health pools, which Sorcerer does still, and has for ages, struggle with. That's the kind of high-level overview. But then we want to get more into the nitty-gritty here. So actual build variety and the power between builds. Fireball is probably the overall best build of the season, but the reason it is because the destructive Fireball node is bugged and it's compounding with the bounces of Illuminator. If that wasn't a thing, it would be a lot worse. So that'll presumably get fixed going into Season 7. So then what are we left with? Well, we're left with Chain Lightning with Splintering Energy, Arclash with Splintering Energy, Frozen Orb with Splintering Energy, Ball Lightning with Splintering Energy. You see kinda where I'm going with that? Chain Lightning, to its credit, does work really well without Splintering Energy, and you can play it pure, and it is definitely the crown for the best non-bugged build of the season for Sorcerer, especially with Frostburn. But there's still that long list of Splintering Energy. Now, Splintering Energy I don't think is currently a bigger problem as it was in Season 5. It was good it got to shine, but I am so happy that they did cap it to 12. They have made tweaks to it, so it's not just all about the Splintering Energy. It's now just a damaging aspect you can add to builds that summon a lot of Lightning Spears, as opposed to everything is about how many Lightning Spears you can get out, so there certainly is something healthy going on there. But when you are seeing a top row of builds that all summon a lot of Lightning Spears and all use Splintering Energy, they just all kind of do it in different ways, either via Frozen Orb and your Shattered Winterglass, or Unstable Currents uptime and high attack speed, there definitely is a kind of issue. Because ultimately, whether you're playing Chain Lightning, Arclash, or Ball Lightning, your build kinda looks the same. You have permanent Unstable Currents, you're permanently spamming the skill of choice, and then Splintering Energy is doing a lot of your damage with the Lightning Spears you're churning out, and really it comes down to which of those three skills is the better damager and applier of what you're trying to do with the rest of the build, and in this season Chain Lightning has won that race. But there is still certainly a issue of pure variety there when it comes to what our best builds are. It would be nice to have something like Fireball non-bugged where we can confidently say this build that doesn't use Splintering Energy is our build of the season, and that would be really nice. Then you go down even a tier to your ice spikes, which are currently, sadly, a joke, even though I adore it as a setup, and here you have the issue that Blizzard itself does nothing for the actual build. You just put 1 point in it, and you're just doing damage via an aspect, and while doing damage via an aspect isn't bad per se, I do want a little shift back to the raw skills being the thing, as opposed to we're dealing damage via aspects, Splintering Energy being the big one, but then Ice Spikes as well, and while Ice Spikes is fun, it would be really nice if putting more ranks into Blizzard scaled your Ice Spike damage, right? At least give a reason to level up the skill you're using to deal damage, because it just feels a little bit weird otherwise. And the fact that in Ice Spikes you need to get a GA chance to hit twice and triple Masterwork hit it, and a temper chance to deal double damage and triple Masterwork hit it, to then still do less damage than other builds, there's a clear issue here, and it needs addressing. As do charged bolts, which are honestly not bad, but they really suffer from their aspect choices, both in the one you have to take in piercing static, lowering your damage, which is ridiculous. It should increase your damage like gravitational does for ball lightning. It shouldn't feel bad putting on an aspect that you need for mobbing, but then makes you weaker against the boss, for example. And then you've got Ice Shards, which has had its time in the sun ages ago, like Season 1, but now has just been collecting dust along with Meteor. Both Ice Shards and Meteor need a unique to really make them pop off. The best Meteor build doesn't use the Meteor unique helmet, so that tells you what you need to know there. And then Ice Shards just has never had one. I really would love like a unique focus for these builds, so they're not competing with other powerful items that we have to use, and we can actually leverage their mechanical power that they bring to bring these builds up. Ice Shards and Meteor has never really had a time to be the build, whereas everything else kind of has, and I hope new uniques in future seasons really do address that. Then you've got just burning in general, if you incinerate your firewalls and so on, and they're always kind of falling behind. They have a really strong niche as premier leveling options, and I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with that, but it would be nice to be able to do some more endgame burning. Incinerate feels really good to use, and you can get to some serious numbers with it, but standing still is never fun in an ARPG, especially on the most mobile fluid class, which is one of the big reasons to play Sorcerer. It would be really cool to get something built into Incinerate to alleviate that, some way of incinerating on the go. And then you have just the entirety of conjurations, playing any kind of conjurations for the damage that they do, all four of them, even with the new unique for familiar, which is essentially in its current state a waste of a unique slot. I think there is potential there if it got changed, if it got buffed, if the limit got raised, but using conjurations to deal damage is just a non-starter, and it's never really happened outside of like the pre-season 0 beta weekend Ice Blades that got them nerfed to this day. So, yeah, there definitely is a lot of room for the builds to both gain power on some underutilized stuff and to diversify the best stuff that's all just kind of doing splintering energy in similar ways. We also then need to look at actually the skill tree, where we have a few of the biggest issues with Sorcerer. So, for the most part, a lot of this isn't really anything that needs super talking about. A lot of what we have is fairly solid. Some stuff is weirdly weak, like Dampen Lair, Energy Focus, the two new ones, but they just need their numbers up. If we got more meaningful DR for a barrier, this would be something worth looking into. But there are some big major ones that we need to talk about. The first of which is Conjuration Mastery. This is so warping for the class and has been since it got buffed, and it really needs to change. This needs to only affect the damage of conjurations, and then it needs to affect them way more. If this got like triple the damage and only affected conjuration damage, we could have some cool pure conjuration builds which have literally never happened, and that would be fun. But the fact that this is just such a big global increase to your damage means that every single Sorcerer build wants to have as many ranks of this as possible and generate as many rank conjurations as possible to get as many stacks all the time as possible. And that's just... you know, every amulet you need to get some Conjuration Mastery, and then every build pump them out, and then play with Conjuration Mastery. It's just so samey every time, and it does mean that our bars look the same every time. Because of this, every build is going to have Lightning Spear and Ice Blades on your bar. You're probably going to run Ice Blade enchantments, both for the cooldown, yes, but also more stacks of Conjuration Mastery. If you didn't need Conjuration Mastery stacks, you could could, you know, not run Lightning Spear on, like, Fireball, and actually just think a little bit more creative, help with vulnerable from elsewhere, and, you know, obviously it helps to have Enlightenment and another lightning skill to press, but when the primary reason that so much conjuration is stuffed into every build is this, we start to see a real warping, and so many builds looking so similar in how they're set up. Nearly every Sorcerer build looks 90% the same in the choices it makes, from the skill tree to the gear to the Paragon, and this is one of the chief reasons why. So the rest of the class needs bringing up and buffing, and then this needs changing to just be conjuration affecting, and then affect it even more. The other one, as I'm sure you probably guessed, is Devouring Blaze. This is a huge damage increase, and every build needs to have it. Every Sorcerer build that isn't damage over time needs to set enemies on fire and needs to crit them hard with Devouring Blaze. It's also why crit is so focused, because of Devouring Blaze. Vulnerable damage is all well and good, but we just want to amp our crits because of Devouring Blaze. Of course, Splintering Energy too, now really cementing that, but Devouring Blaze again is very warping. It dictates enchantment slot because of Firebolt. At the moment, Unstable Currents only summoning Fire Familiars is a nice alleviator of that, but I'm sure that'll get fixed and it's only temporary. I think Devouring Blaze should only affect fire critical hits, and let Frost and Shock do something different and not have to cram Burning into their builds. Of course, then buff Frost and Shock to compensate, and then some, but we need freeing. I'm not saying nerf Sorcerer when I say free us from Devouring Blaze and Conjuration Mastery. I'm saying buff the class to be even more powerful than it is with them now, but without needing them, so we have actual diversity between the choices made between the elements and various builds. These two existing dictate so much of what we have to do with nearly every build that it really strangles creativity. And then we have our key passives. Enlightenment has been a godsend. It's wonderful. The damage, the attack speed, the stacking of all your non-physical damage, even the mana regen is super helpful in a lot of builds. This is awesome. But it now has the issue where every build is just using Enlightenment. And the fix for this is, well, these other key passives need to be brought up to Enlightenment strength. Enlightenment should be the choice you use in a multi-element build designed to use it, not just the default, because we just have so many multi-elements anyway, because every build's bars basically look like this, so we may as well use Enlightenment. These key passives need some increase. Obviously, Combustion is fine. For pure burning, this is a big increase, and you would take it over Enlightenment, though not all the time. It could just do with getting stronger, and honestly, it could do with scaling more and scaling harder. Everything could do with scaling more and scaling harder. But you compare Enlightenment to S's Ferocity, so your fire critical strike damage is increased by 25 multiplicative, right? But this increases all damage you do by 25 multiplicative, so it's just better, and it does more with the attack speed and the Cold Lightning Fire adding. So why would you ever take S's Ferocity? Even against a boss where you can get the critical strike chance, you don't need that because you have 100%, because Air of Perdition is now a thing, and that gives you so much extra crit chance so easily. So S's Ferocity literally has no reason to exist. Even the aspect for the attack speed, which was a good reason to use it, doesn't work anymore because we are so strangled for aspect space that we can't dedicate really a non-damage aspect, and also we can get loads of attack speed easily via other methods. One of them, yeah, is this, another 20% from Enlightenment. So S's Ferocity needs either a massive buff or ideally a more mechanically interesting rework along with a massive buff. Via's Mastery was honestly quite good. The change to it is really, really nice. The tankiness it gives you, these 250% explosions, yeah, it just needs a higher chance to do it. This one is fixed by numbers. Overflowing Energy is really sad. It did have its place. It used to be a nice little pick for some cooldown reduction heavy builds that really worked, and indeed got used in early Lightning Spears in Season 5, but ultimately we don't really need a lot of help with cooldown reduction these days, especially with Evocation coming in, and you can just get it from a lot of sources, and Rakenov's Wake being popular, this just doesn't do a lot. And even if you look at it as Crackling Energy focused, Crackling Energy does so little damage, and is never, at least in its current form, going to be a build that this doesn't really come into it either. I don't mind the idea of Crackling Energy being a build and doing damage with the pulsing. It just needs to do like 1,000 more damage, times more damage. So this kind of doesn't have a place, and either needs catastrophically buffing, and it needs to work in real damage increases, or a complete rework into another option entirely. Shatter does what it does. It's the reason we can push Pit as high as we can, but ultimately it's not really got a place outside of that. It would be really fun to use Shatter and then, like the Frozen Frost Nova enchant, so your conjurations are Frost Novering everything and then everything's shattering, and that's come up a couple times, but then against a boss, the Frost Nova enchant doesn't help, and against the boss, the Shatter key passive doesn't help, so suddenly one of your 2 enchantment slots and your key passive choice is ruined, unless the boss summons ads, which, you know, is the whole deal, but in general, Shatter isn't going to help you kill a Duriel faster, it's not going to help you farm mythic uniques faster. I think Shatter should really affect on stagger meters and just reapply 45% of the damage you do while a boss is staggered after it finishes. That would give it some meaty boss burst, and that would be really, really cool, and let you actually play Shatter in non-literally cheesy pit-pushing scenarios. Then Avalanche. This is okay-ish. If it was permanently active, like if you just selected this and then Ice Shards, Frozen Orb, and Blizzard did 60% multiplicative increased damage, then you could just about justify using it over Enlightenment, right? But the fact that it's a chance means only really Ice Shards can leverage this. You can make it so it's permanent, but then you have the aspect of Avalanche, so you get an extra couple stacks of it, but then you're dedicating a very limited aspect space to this, as opposed to something like Stormswell and just doing a load more damage permanently with a permanent ice armor. So this really struggles to have a place. It needs to have the aspect baked in, it needs to give you 3 stacks when it procs, and it also needs to scale and apply more damage, and then we could start to look at it for the skills it actually affects. So these key passives all just need more scaling, more tune-up, and in some cases entire reworks to have them at all competitive with Enlightenment and just give the class the damage it needs. We really are suffering from key passives here, where most of them you're just never going to think about in their current state. So key passive rework, Devouring Blaze, and Conjuration Mastery addressed, and we're looking a lot rosier to start with, assuming the damage is then buffed from elsewhere. Then I want to talk gear and actually setting up a build. Things have gotten way too pigeonholey between builds. So I am currently playing Ball Lightning, right? And this is my setup. Everything's all well and good. I've got my Ball Lightning orbiting, that's nice. I've got my Storm Swell, I've got my Lightning Spear on my amulet. If I wanted to switch to, let's say, an entirely different build, right? I wanted to go to Arclash. Well, what I would do is go to my skill tree. I would take all the points out of Ball Lightning, I would come up here, and then I would put all the points into Arclash, and then I could take a couple out of Firebolt, reassign them. I could take stuff like Dominance out and reassign them because it doesn't affect Arclash, but it's a very simple, like, 10-point change. And then my gear, I would swap this sword for Varathiel, and then I would be done. That's it. I wouldn't even need to open my Paragon tree because it would be identical. That's it. I've entirely swapped build, and I have not changed the skills on my bar except the one I'm dealing damage with. I've changed one item I'm wearing. I've not changed my Paragon, and I've changed like 5 to 10 skill points. Now, I think that example puts across where I'm going with this. Every single Sorcerer build uses Talrasha. Every single Sorcerer build that spends mana uses Starless Skies. Every single Sorcerer build is Air of Perdition and Shroud of False Death. Every single Sorcerer build is going to be using Rakenov's Wake, unless you're playing Chain Lightning, to get your resist cap. Every single Sorcerer build is going to be using Orange Herald on your legs, and your legs are going to be a normal legendary to solve armor because you need these 2 mythic uniques, and most Sorcerer builds want permanent unstable unstable currents because of the attack speed, which actually, you know, just to tangent a little bit, ultimates are really suffering. Like, unstable currents is great, both in shock builds and not. The attack speed amp is lovely, though using an entire ultimate just for 25% attack speed and not the ultimate itself does feel bad. Like, if I'm playing a build using a frost skill, I should want deep freeze. If I'm playing a build using a fire skill, I should want inferno. Inferno is fine while leveling, but it doesn't do enough damage. It just doesn't do enough of anything, really, even in burn builds. And deep freeze is even worse. Like, the immunity is, I guess, nice in sort of a fantasy world where, you know, we're having to struggle to survive over long boss fights and it comes in clutch and, you know, but that's just not the reality of an ARPG or how this is played. All this does is slow you down while it's active and then doesn't even do the damage to make that worth it, and it's a shame because this is my favorite skill in the entire game conceptually. The ultimates really need a tune-up, both damage and mechanically, to be meaningfully viable ever over permanent 25% attack speed. And that's really kind of sad when you put it that way, right? The best ultimate Sorcerer has, used in essentially every build, is gain 25% attack speed. That's it. So, yeah, that is definitely something. In any case, then, you see where we're at. There is very few meaningful gear changes to make, and that's kind of a shame. But the main way that this comes in and is more of an issue is aspects. Our legendary aspects. So let's say that I am going to run Fireball. I need Staff of Endless Rage and I need Gloves of the Illuminator, right? And the few times you don't use your Tal Rasher is if you're doing Blizzard because you need Blue Rose, but then you feel bad because you're giving up 75% damage for technically a little bit more, but certainly not a huge amount. And the one time you're not going to use a normal neck is if you're specifically Fractured Winterglassing. But you get the point. So I'm now in Fireball, right? Which means all I have in order to, you know, stay armor and res capped and all of that goodness is my legs, which is going to be Orange Herald because every build needs unstable currents for the attack speed, and then my amulet, which is going to be the one aspect that is best for Fireball, i.e. the one aspect that gives it the most damage, which at least in Fireball's case is 3 curses, unique to Fireball, or at least fire builds in general, and that's really nice. But then I'm sort of done, right? I just don't get another aspect because everything else has to be what it is because we need all the damage we can get from these items. So that's a little bit of a shame. Let's say I want to play Chain Lightning. I put my Frostburn on, I put my azurewrath on, we get our focus, and then suddenly we get 2 aspects. An entire choice of 2 aspects. And one of them is probably always going to be Lightning Spear, at least unless anything changes, which means then we get 1 choice for a damage increasing aspect. And I could keep swapping builds and keep making examples, but you see where we're going with this. We have a lot of aspects for Sorcerer, of course we do. But none of them are essentially worth using because we just need damage. So we're always going to use your Storm Swell because it's a huge amount of damage for having permanent ice armor on, or you're always going to use your Shredding Blades because it's a huge amount of damage. Every build is going to use these 2 because we need as much damage as we can get, and that's 2 aspects used. And 2 aspects for damage is kind of the limit of essentially every single Sorcerer build. So every other aspect that exists, you just can't get a look in, so it might as well not exist, which is a shame because there's some really fun, interesting aspects to actually play with. But then we look at something like these 2, Piercing Cold and Piercing Static. If you're playing Ice Shards, you need Piercing Cold or you just can't function in a mobbing scenario. So in order to play Ice Shards, you automatically are now doing a Storm Swell or a Shredding Blades less damage than every other build because you require this mechanical enabler to play the build. If you are playing Charged Bolts, which only gets like 1, maybe 2 for your gloves, aspect slots, you have to take Piercing Static or you can't mob, and then you are now doing not just a Storm Swell or Shredding Blades less damage than the builds, you're also doing less damage because Piercing Static lowers your damage. Like, this was the same problem that Gravitational suffered before it increased Ball Lightning. This just categorically needs buffing to increase Charge Bolt damage while giving it piercing, and then that would be a huge help. It feels so bad to have to use an aspect, which then costs you a more damaging aspect, but then also lowers your damage artificially on top of that. And it's a shame because Charge Bolts is a really fun skill, it sounds great going off, but you're just left with a sour taste having to use this. So by default, unless anything changes, any build that needs a mechanically enabling aspect to function is just going to have such a harder time competing with builds that can just slap on uniques, throw on Storm Swell, unlike your amulet, and then call it a day. So your aspect strength and variety is something that really needs addressing on Sorcerer. And I think really the biggest way to do that is to let us go full rogue and have 3 weapons. If we could actually have a staff and then also a wand and focus, free up 2 extra aspects, get 2 extra sets of affixes, we would start to really feel something. It would add some creative flair. If we could do enough damage that we could add a comfort or a mechanically interesting aspect and not just go pure numbers. But currently we're so weak that we have to take pure numbers everywhere we can get them. I really cannot stress how much it would help the class feel good and be fun to have staff, wand, focus at all times. I would even take a 3rd ring slot. If you could just have 3 rings at all time as a sorcerer unique thing, that would also be really fun. 1 more aspect, another set of tempers, you could add Blue Rose, Talrasha, and Stylus Skies to Blizzard, that would be really entertaining, but however it's done, Sorcerer needs more aspect space, and that's something to really keep in mind. Then, talking of space, we need to talk enchantments. First and foremost, we just need a 3rd enchantment slot. We need it back. The enchantments aren't strong enough to be worth limiting to 2. It's a real shame. But past that, mechanically, and in a lot of cases numerically, they need a massive overhaul / buff. Like, if we look at something like Firebolt, of course, which is needed for burning damage and Devouring Blaze, if Devouring Blaze gets changed to only be fire builds, which then don't need Firebolt, we can actually ignore this and then play something different in your shock and your ice builds, and even in your fire ones too. Like, until Fireball got added a inbuilt burn as part of its skill tree, we were playing Firebolt to make a ball of fire set things on fire so we could crit them harder. Like, that just fundamentally on a logical level was hilarious. But in any case, having to put this in so enemies are technically burning so the number go up on them isn't really a fun class mechanic. It's not doing anything sort of interesting, and that's what I would really love to see from enchantments, something mechanically altering. Like, if I put a skill in here, I want it to play differently, like that kind of level, or at least give a sort of meaningful-esque buff, like a load of conditional cooldown reduction you can cycle around. In fact, ideal situation would be using enchantments to let you change the element of a skill. If you could put, like, Spark enchantment in, use the basics for this, and now your core skills count as shock skills, so you can fire Shock, Frost, Ice Shards, and then, you know, Frostbolt makes your skills count as Frost, so you can fire Frost Shock, Charged Bolts. That would be really, really nice. And as it currently is, I mean, killing an enemy has a 14% chance to form a crackling energy? What is that doing for anyone? Like, I don't want to have like a haha moment. Like, designing and maintaining and running a game isn't easy. The Diablo team has been doing a fantastic job season to season, and the game is in the best state it's ever been. Balance is hard, mechanics aren't just given to you, right? But I feel like this is one of these that was there at like season 0, and it seemed fine at the time and didn't really get much thought. But when you really sit down and read this, killing an enemy is a 14% chance to form a crackling energy. No one uses overwhelming currents. You're not going to be using it for damage. If this was a 100% chance, it would still be one of the weakest things in the game. Even if you're thinking, oh, I'll use like Spark and then Lightning Spear, so I kill things, they drop an energy, and then I summon a Lightning Spear. Oh, that would be cool. Maybe. If this was a 100% chance to summon a Lightning Spear, and this was a 100% chance to drop an energy, so every enemy you kill makes a lightning spear happen. That would be fun. But no, this is so unfathomably weak, but beyond that, it's so unfathomably pointless, because no build that exists would ever have a reason to need a 14% chance to get 1 extra crackling energy per enemy. If you need crackling energy, I mean, you just do it in so many different better ways. Like, I don't know, use your ball lightning that just spews it out. I don't have the correct gear on from my examples, but it's so confusing to me that could ever be a thing. It's so weak. It's so weak. And that exists on a lot of them. Hell, let ultimates get an enchantment, give them a cool effect, and maybe make an ultimate enchantment take up 2 enchantment slots and give the 3rd one back so we can have an ultimate enchantment and a 3rd one. Or just add a 3rd ultimate enchantment slot and give each ultimate a big powerful enchantment effect. That would solve both the ultimate issue and the enchantment issue at the same time. And then you look at something like Blizzard. This Blizzard that's summoned doesn't even produce ice spikes. So you get a Blizzard that does no damage, and it doesn't do ice spikes, so you can't even use it as like an extra free Blizzard in the ice spikes build, and it's only up 1/3 of the time? If this gave you a permanent Blizzard above your head, and it actually took your aspects into account, then we're talking. Maybe we have a little fun build here. We can just sort of walk through content with a Blizzard pounding down ice spikes. That's really entertaining. That's mechanically interesting and fun. It probably wouldn't even be the numerically strongest option, but it would be interesting and still not useless enough to be worth taking out of the pure joy of playing it. And that's what I want to see. Incinerate getting buffed to just have a permanent 2nd Incinerate Serpent is the right direction. That felt really fun to use while leveling, but so many of these need a change and a tune-up. A lot of them just need a numbers increase so they happen more, like Ball Lightning and Firewall. They're fun effects, they just need to happen more, and then some just need a complete ground-up rework to give them something at all meaningful to actually use. And if that happens, then we're kind of talking. 3rd enchantment slot, cool unique enchantments for your ultimates, and then at least every enchantment being somewhat viable numerically. Make the only happens every now and then happen permanently, and we're kind of looking at something nice. Then to just quickly touch on Paragon in the new system. I actually quite like the new system. I don't think being limited to 5 boards is bad. Stretching for like 8 glyphs board to board, barely spending points, felt a bit weird, and it's nice to see things filled out. However, I have leveled 5 glyphs this season. 5. And I have used all 5 in every build I have ever done, and in not one of those builds have they not been the best 5 glyphs to use. At worst, the 5th one could be side-graded. So that's already a problem. Not that I really want to advocate for this, because, you know, leveling glyphs is quite slow as a sorcerer that can't really chain farm pit 100s, but the fact that every other glyph is completely ignorable, like not even using stalagmite in ice spikes level, is definitely a problem. Then beyond that, every single sorcerer build this season has used Fundamental Release, Frigid Fate, and Burning Instinct. Occasionally this board over here has changed depending on the build. That's also kind of a problem. Then we have the legendary nodes. Fundamental Release is lovely. Every build is going to take it, 30% multiplicative increase. Then we've got Frigid Fate. Every build is going to take it, 60% multiplicative increase. These need to give more so the class can do competitive damage, but on a base mechanical level, these are both lovely. Past that, you just don't take legendary nodes unless it's a more niche use for a particular build. Of course, you'll take Burning Instinct if you're doing a burning build. You'll pick up Static Surge if you're doing Chain Lightning, but you also don't need it. You can have infinite mana without it. You have infinite vulnerable without it. So what exactly is Static Surge doing? It needs to give damage to shock builds, because currently shock builds don't have a unique damage increasing legendary node anywhere, which is a real crime. Like, this needs to be changed to be improved to give damage. It needs to make this enhanced Chain Lightning or Charged Bolts also do more damage a la Avalanche, not just give mana. then we actually look at them in the other options, and something like Searing Heat doing another 60 multi for burning, that's really, really nice on your crit hits for your fireball and your meteor, so that's really good. But then we just kind of run out. No one's using Crackling Energy. Enchantment Master is fine, but it's just kind of taken 2 spent points, and bottom line, our legendary nodes in general just need to be better. It feels really bad to not take 4 legendary nodes. If we're limited to 4 boards past the starter, then every legendary node on every board should be worth taking, like Spiritborn. I should feel really happy to get Static Surge, to get Burning Instinct, and to have them online alongside Fundamental Release and Frigid Fate. You know, build allowing. Obviously, these two don't really mechanically work with each other, but it would be really nice if every build I could actually make that happen. If I was playing an ice build, of course this right board would be Icefall, you'd get the Icefall node, that would be really good, but then you'd still not have a 5th legendary node worth taking over here. That said, if enchantments do get the rework and the tune-up, Enchantment Master by default, making them stronger again, becomes a much more appealing option. Ultimately, we just need more legendary nodes worth taking, we need them to do more damage, to scale harder, and then shock skills especially need some attention in their options because they essentially don't have any. And that kind of brings us to the end of a lot of the fundamental issues that I think exist with Sorcerer. You could probably summarize it all as the entire class is too samey no matter what build you're playing, and the unique class mechanic and enchantments needs to be a whole lot better. There is a lot more nuance, of course, we've spent a long time talking about it now, but yeah, I hope this at least is interesting, it comes across, and is something that we can convey to Blizzard and really see this class that on a base level is a lot of fun and that we love shine ever brighter going into future seasons. For now though, like you've enjoyed this, subscribe and hit the bell for more, consider supporting the future channel on Patreon down below, and until we meet again, a goodbye.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.